Every single thing that you just said is untrue. The Jews were the original nation, hundreds and hundreds of years before Islam was even invented. Basically, the precursor of the United Nations, the League of Nations, decided that as a matter of international treaty obligation, the British would be given custodianship of Palestine, called the Mandate, under which Britain would be under a binding treaty obligation to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland to recreate it. Now, what was Palestine at the time? Well, a bit of it, a very large chunk of it, was promptly given away to the Arabs by Winston Churchill to become Transjordan, which is now Jordan. So what did that leave as the territory within which Britain had a binding duty to return the Jews as a matter of historic right? What was that territory? It is what is now Israel, what is called the West Bank, and Gaza.
Why won't Green Deputy Leader won't answer that Hamas needs to be dismantled?
Hamas need to be dismantled?
Well, listen, the situation with Hamas is that it has nothing, I can't keep repeating it again and again. It has nothing to do with Palestinian statehood and Palestinian self-determination.
No, the question was, does Hamas need to be dismantled?
The Palestinians need to decide where they want to go with their own region, not intervention from Western countries.
So if they choose Hamas, that's okay?
David, that is such, what can I say, like we're creating this hypothetical scenario of what Palestinians, if and when they get self-determination,
well, it's not hypothetical to ask, should Hamas be
rather than actually questioning the Labour government hard on why they aren't stopping this slaughter, why they aren't putting sanctions on Israel. That's the question to ask, not a hypothetical, theoretical scenario that probably is never likely to happen.
Well, let me ask you one more time, and this isn't hypothetical. Do you think Hamas should be dismantled?
Hamas is listed as a terrorist organization, and there is absolutely no change that we are demanding in that.
Should it be dismantled?
Hamas is an organization that exists in the region that we are talking about here, right? Who will dismantle it? It is up to the people in Palestine and that region to make sure that people can live in peace. But I will say this again. At the moment, only some people in that region have the rights that every human deserves.
Okay, but surely you can say,
them don't.
Surely you're able to say whether you'd like to see them gone.
Listen how Alana Omar tried to convince that there is no anti-Jewish protest in American colleges.
Get a clarification earlier. One of my colleagues asked you, have you seen anti-Muslim protests on campus?
I have seen, we have had pro-Israeli demonstrations on campus.
No.
But
just a protest that was against Muslims.
No, I have not.
Have you seen one against Arabs?
No, I have not.
Have you seen one against Palestinians?
No, I have not.
Have you seen one against Jewish people? Have you seen a protest saying we are against Jewish people?
No, I have seen.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. There has been a rise in targeting and harassment against anti-war protesters because it's been pro-war and anti-war protesters is what it seems like, correct?
Correct. There has been.
Okay, thank you.
You answered one of the questions of our colleagues across the aisle. You said there has been no anti-Jewish protests. Do the other individuals on the panel agree with that? Start with you, Professor Skizzer.
So I think there have been anti-Semitic protests, so I would say yes.
So you disagree? There have been anti-Jewish protests. Ms. Shipman?
I know there have been a number of incidents, especially one at our law school recently, that the students were trying to call a protest, but it was an event to harass admitted students who were Jewish, and it's outrageous.
So that's anti-Jewish. So the answer would be yes?
Yes.
And Mr. Greenwald?
There have been anti-Semitic events on campus, which I interpret as anti-Jewish.
And Dr. Shafiq, you realize that at some of these events, the slurs and the chants have been F the Jews, death to Jews,
yep.
F Israel, no safe place, death to the Zionist state, Jews out. You don't think those are anti-Jewish?
Completely anti-Jewish, completely unacceptable.
So you changed your testimony on that
horrible.
issue as well? So there have been anti-Jewish protests?
I didn't get to finish my sentence. So what I was going to say was there were protests that were called
That's not what you were asked. You were asked, were there any anti-Jewish protests? And you said no.
So the protest was not labeled as an anti-Jewish protest.
I'm not asking what it was labeled.
Anti-Israeli government policy.
The question wasn't what it was labeled.
But anti-Semitic incidents happened, or anti-Semitic things were said. So I just wanted
It is
to
an
finish.
anti-Jewish protest. You agree with that? You change your testimony?
Congresswoman, anti-Jewish things were said at protests, yes.
Thank you for changing your testimony. Another instance when you changed.
The Wall Street Journal ran a story yesterday that got a lot of attention. It features quotes from Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar welcoming the deaths of Gazans. He believes that the more Palestinian blood that is spilled, the closer he'll get to the liberation of Palestine. Sinwar, if you recall, duped the Israelis for 2 years leading up to the 10/7 attacks. From the moment the last war ended in 2021, Sinwar worked to convince the Israelis that he wanted more opportunities for the people of Gaza. The Israelis swallowed Sinwar's camel fertilizer, hook, line, and sinker. They eased restrictions on Gaza, they reduced security on the border, and that's when Sinwar ordered the October slaughter. From what we already knew and what was just published, Sinwar never intended to provide opportunities for his people. No, his goal was to thrust his own people into a horrific war and then to use their deaths as a public relations tool to bludgeon the Israelis. Well, guess what? It's working. Every time the Israelis operate in Gaza, every time they rescue hostages, every time they defend their own people, and the international community condemns Israel for it, you know what they're doing? They're playing right into Sinwar's hands. It's all there in black and white. It's almost as if the world's leaders are unwittingly running plays out of Sinwar's playbook. Come to think of it, the more I read, including the new UN report alleging war crimes on both sides released this morning,
See the
more
truth
I
about
think
Special
it may not
Rapporteur
be
Francesca
unwitting
Albanese,
at all.
former UNRWA lawyer.
Finally did one thing right. It has opened an investigation into allegations that Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese took external funds from pro-Hamas groups to pay for her $20,000 lobbying trip to Australia. She used the trip to lobby a major pension fund to divest from Israel. We at UN Watch filed papers to terminate her mandate. Who is Albanese? She's a former lawyer with UNRWA who co-founded a global network to lobby against Israel. She recently became the first UN human rights rapporteur in the history of the United Nations to be condemned by France and Germany for anti-Semitism. We're calling on the UN to terminate Albanese's mandate, not only on account of her financial improprieties. She says America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. She told a Hamas conference, "You have the right to resist." Routinely, she justifies the massacre of October 7th. Look, enough is enough. She's got to go. Please sign our petition. See the link in our bio. Thank you.
How many fatalities is worth going in and conducting a raid like this in broad daylight when civilians are obviously out and
Sadly, you cannot interview here one of the Hamas commanders because he's the right address to ask him this question. It's not us to justify. They are putting their own civilians in harm's way. What other choice do we have? Any country would do the same in order to release and rescue their hostages. And still, we don't know the real numbers of uninvolved civilians. There were so many civilians there that were cooperating with Hamas. Many times we know that Hamas is using civilians that are not affiliated with any terrorist organization, but still they are terrorists. So we cannot still use the terrorist numbers, as you said. These are Hamas numbers. If we don't put the blame on Hamas, we are helping and advancing their strategy, because otherwise other terrorists are going to use the same strategy in many other countries. If you can abduct innocent civilians and then hold them in civilians' apartments and think that you have immunity, it's not going to work. We will never defeat terrorism.